Julia Martinez stood at the kitchen window, her hands submerged in soapy dishwater, a contented smile playing on her lips as she watched her husband, Simon, chase their 3 giggling children around the backyard. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the scene, and Julia felt a warm surge of happiness in her chest. At 35, Julia was living the life she had always dreamed of. She and Simon had been married for 10 blissful years, and their love had only grown stronger with each passing day. Their children, 8-year-old Kevin, 6-year-old Luke, and 4-year-old Sally, were the center of their world, filling their days with laughter, chaos, and boundless joy. As she dried her hands on a worn kitchen towel, Julia reflected on how far they had come. She and Simon had met in college, 2 ambitious young students with big dreams. Julia, having grown up in a series of foster homes, had never known the stability of a loving family. Simon, with his easy smile and kind eyes, had shown her what it meant to be truly loved and accepted. After graduation, they had married and thrown themselves into building their careers. Simon had landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm, quickly climbing the ranks with his innovative ideas and charismatic personality. Julia had found her calling as an elementary school teacher, pouring her heart into nurturing young minds. When Kevin was born, they had made the decision for Julia to step back from her career to focus on raising their family. It hadn't been an easy choice, but as she watched her children grow and thrive, Julia knew it had been the right one for them. "Mom! Mom! Look what Dad taught us!" Kevin's excited voice broke through her reverie. Julia looked up to see her eldest son attempting a wobbly cartwheel, his brothers clapping enthusiastically. "That's wonderful, sweetie," Julia called back, laughing as Kevin toppled over, a wide grin on his face despite his less-than-perfect execution. Simon jogged over to the window, slightly out of breath but beaming. "I think I've created a monster," he chuckled, leaning in to plant a quick kiss on Julia's cheek. "They're going to be doing cartwheels all over the house now." Julia playfully swatted him with the dish towel. "And who's going to be responsible for any broken lamps, I wonder?" Simon held up his hands in mock surrender. "Guilty as charged. But admit it, you love seeing them so happy." "I do," Julia agreed softly, her eyes shining with emotion. "We're so lucky, Simon. Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life." Simon wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "We've worked hard for this, Jules. We deserve every bit of happiness we have." As they stood there, watching their children play in the fading sunlight, neither Julia nor Simon could have imagined how quickly their perfect world was about to come crashing down. The first signs of trouble came so subtly that Julia almost missed them. It started with Simon coming home later than usual, his brow furrowed with worry lines that hadn't been there before. He brushed off her concerns, attributing his stress to a big project at work. But as the weeks wore on, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Simon grew distant, spending more time locked away in his home office than with the family. The laughter and joy that had once filled their home seemed to dim, replaced by an undercurrent of tension that even the children could sense. It all came to a head on a crisp autumn evening. Julia had just put the kids to bed when she heard the front door open and close with a quiet click. She made her way downstairs, expecting to find Simon in the kitchen grabbing a late dinner. Instead, she found him slumped on the couch, his head in his hands. "Simon," she asked tentatively, her heart racing with fear. "What's wrong?" He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a despair she had never seen before. "I've been let go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Julia felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. "What? But how? Why?" Simon ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders sagging with defeat. "Budget cuts. They're downsizing the entire department. I tried to fight it, Jules. I did everything I could, but..." Julia moved to sit beside him, wrapping her arms around his trembling form. "It's okay," she murmured, even as her mind raced with the implications of this news. "We'll figure this out. Together." But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, it became clear that figuring it out wasn't going to be as easy as Julia had hoped. Simon threw himself into job hunting with a desperate intensity, but each rejection seemed to chip away at his confidence and optimism. Julia did her best to keep the family afloat. She picked up part-time work at the local library, carefully managing their savings to stretch every dollar. She put on a brave face for the children, assuring them that everything would be all right, even as she lay awake at night worrying about how they would make the next mortgage payment. It was Simon who crumbled first. Julia came home one afternoon to find him sprawled on the couch, an empty beer bottle dangling from his fingers. The acrid smell of alcohol hung in the air, mixing unpleasantly with the stale odor of unwashed clothes and despair. "Simon," she gasped, shock and disappointment warring in her voice. "What are you doing?" He looked at her through bloodshot eyes, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. What does it look like, Jules? I'm embracing my new role as a worthless, unemployed bum. Julia flinched at the self-loathing in his voice. You're not worthless, she insisted, moving to kneel beside him. This is just a setback. We'll get through this. But Simon was beyond hearing her encouragement. He pushed himself up, swaying slightly as he stood. A setback, he sneered. Wake up, Julia. It's been months. No one wants to hire a washed-up has-been like me. That's not true, Julia protested, reaching for him. You just need to keep trying. Keep trying? Simon's voice rose, anger flashing in his eyes. That's all I've been doing. And what good has it done? We're drowning in debt, the kids can barely remember what it's like to have a normal life, and you're killing yourself trying to hold everything together. Julia felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm doing it because I love you, she said softly. Because I believe in you. For a moment, something softened in Simon's expression. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by a cold, hard mask. Well, maybe you shouldn't, he muttered, brushing past her to grab his keys. Where are you going? Julia asked, alarm rising in her chest. Out, Simon replied shortly. Don't wait up. The slamming of the front door echoed through the house, followed by the roar of Simon's car engine. Julia sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands as the tears she had been holding back for months finally broke free. She didn't know how long she sat there, sobbing quietly, before a small voice broke through her misery. Mommy? Why are you crying? Julia looked up to see Kevin standing in the doorway, his young face etched with concern. Hastily wiping her eyes, she forced a smile. It's nothing, sweetheart. Mommy's just a little tired. Kevin padded over to her, climbing onto the couch and wrapping his small arms around her. It's okay, Mommy, he said solemnly. I'll take care of you. Julia hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with love even as it ached with the weight of their situation. In that moment, she made a silent vow. No matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, she would protect her children. She would give them the stable, loving home she had never had growing up, even if it meant facing the hardest decision of her life. The weeks that followed Simon's first drunken outburst were a blur of tension and heartache for Julia. She watched helplessly as the man she loved, the father of her children, spiraled deeper into depression and alcoholism. Simon's days became a monotonous cycle of half-hearted job searches followed by hours spent in front of the television, beer in hand. Julia tried everything she could think of to help him. She researched job opportunities, offered to help him update his resume, even suggested he speak to a therapist. But Simon rejected every attempt, his mood swinging between sullen silence and explosive anger. The children, once so carefree and joyful, became quiet and withdrawn. Julia would often find Kevin comforting his younger siblings, trying to shield them from their father's unpredictable moods. It broke her heart to see her 8-year-old son shouldering such a heavy burden. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Julia decided to have a heart-to-heart with Simon. She waited until the children were in bed, then approached him as he sat in his usual spot on the couch, the glow of the television illuminating his unshaven face. Simon, she said gently, sitting beside him. We need to talk. He grunted non-committally, not taking his eyes off the screen. Julia took a deep breath, steeling herself. I'm worried about you. About us. The children are scared, Simon. They don't understand what's happening. This seemed to penetrate Simon's fog. He turned to look at her, his eyes bloodshot but finally focusing. What do you want me to say, Jules? That I'm sorry for being a failure? For letting you all down? You haven't let us down, Julia insisted, reaching for his hand. But we need you. The kids need their father back. I need my husband back. For a moment, Simon's expression softened, and Julia felt a flicker of hope. But then his face hardened again, and he pulled his hand away. I can't be what you need anymore, he said, his voice low and bitter. You'd all be better off without me. Julia felt as if she'd been slapped. How can you say that? We love you, Simon. We're a family. Simon stood abruptly, swaying slightly. A family, he sneered. Look around, Julia. This isn't a family. It's a fucking disaster. His voice had risen, and Julia glanced anxiously towards the stairs, praying the children wouldn't wake. Please, Simon, she pleaded. Keep your voice down. Let's just talk about this calmly. But Simon was beyond reason. Don't tell me what to do, he shouted, his face contorting with rage. I'm sick of your nagging, your disappointed looks. You think I don't know how pathetic I am? How much of a burden I've become? Julia stood, reaching for him. That's not true. Her words were cut off as Simon's hand connected with her cheek, the force of the slap sending her stumbling backwards. For a moment, the room was utterly silent, both of them frozen in shock at what had just happened. Then, from the top of the stairs came a small, terrified voice. Mommy? Julia turned to see Kevin standing there, his eyes wide with fear. Behind him, Luke and Sally peered around the corner, clinging to each other. The sight of her children's frightened faces snapped Julia out of her shock. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. Go back to your rooms, sweethearts, she said, forcing her voice to remain calm. Everything's okay. Mommy will be up in a minute. As the children reluctantly retreated, Julia turned back to Simon. He stood there, staring at his hand as if he couldn't believe what he'd done. "Jules," he began, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean dash." "Don't," Julia cut him off, her voice cold. "Just, don't." Without another word, she turned and climbed the stairs. Her cheek throbbed, but the pain in her heart was far worse. As she comforted her crying children, assuring them that everything would be all right, Julia's mind was racing. She knew now that she couldn't stay. For the sake of her children, for her own sake, she had to leave. The thought terrified her. She had no job, no savings, nowhere to go. But as she held her trembling children close, she knew that any future, no matter how uncertain, was better than staying in a home filled with fear and violence. That night, after the children had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep, Julia began to plan. She would wait until Simon passed out, a daily occurrence now, and then she would take the children and go. Where, she didn't know. But she would figure it out. She had to. As she packed a small bag with essentials, Julia's eyes fell on a framed photo on her bedside table. It showed her and Simon on their wedding day, both of them radiant with happiness and hope for the future. A sob caught in her throat as she realized how far they had fallen from that perfect moment. "I'm sorry, Simon," she whispered, touching the photo gently. "I love you. But I have to protect our children. Even if it means protecting them from you." With a heavy heart, Julia zipped up the bag and waited for her chance to escape into an uncertain future. Julia straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze steadily. "We're starting over," she said simply. "We need a place to live, Mr. Jenkins. I can't pay much, but I promise I'll be a good tenant. I'll take care of the place, do repairs, anything you need." Mr. Jenkins studied her for a long moment, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in thought. Then, to Julia's surprise, his face softened into a grandfatherly smile. "Well, Mr. Jenkins said, his voice softening, I've been around long enough to know when someone's in a tight spot. The place ain't much, but it's clean and safe. If you're willing to do some work around the property to offset the rent, we might be able to work something out." Julia felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Mr. Jenkins waved off her thanks, a bit embarrassed by her gratitude. "Let's take a look inside, shall we? You can decide if it'll suit you and the little ones." The house was small and in need of some TLC, but to Julia, it looked like paradise. There were 2 tiny bedrooms, a small living area, and a kitchenette that had seen better days. But it was clean, as Mr. Jenkins had promised, and Julia could already envision how she could make it feel like home. "We'll take it," she said firmly, before she could second-guess herself. Mr. Jenkins nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "All right then. Let's sort out the paperwork. You can move in today if you like." As Julia signed the rental agreement with shaking hands, she felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. This was it, the first step towards their new life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Julia threw herself into making their new house a home, scouring thrift stores and garage sales for affordable furniture and household items. She planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, hoping to save money on groceries. The children, though still confused and sometimes sad about leaving their old home, slowly began to adjust to their new surroundings. Julia knew she needed to find work quickly. Their meager savings wouldn't last long, even with the reduced rent Mr. Jenkins had graciously offered. She applied for every job she could find, from waitressing to retail, but kept running into the same problem, her lack of recent work experience and the need for flexible hours to care for her children. It was during one of her job-hunting excursions that Julia stumbled upon Olivia Johnson's discount store. The small shop was tucked away on a quiet street, its windows filled with an eclectic array of items at bargain prices. A hand-painted sign in the window caught Julia's eye, "Part-time help wanted." With a deep breath, Julia pushed open the door, the cheerful tinkle of a bell announcing her arrival. The shop was cluttered but tidy, filled with the kind of treasures one might find at a well-curated garage sale. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, who looked up as Julia entered. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked, her voice warm and welcoming. Julia approached the counter, summoning her courage. "I saw the sign in the window," she began. "I'm looking for work, and I was hoping." The woman, Olivia Johnson, as Julia would soon learn, studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Well, you've come to the right place. I'm not getting any younger, and this old shop could use a pair of younger hands. Tell me, what's your name?" "Julia," she replied, relief flooding through her. "Julia Martinez." Olivia's smile widened. "Well, Julia Martinez, why don't you tell me a bit about yourself?" And so Julia found herself pouring out her story to this kind stranger, her marriage to Simon, the loss of his job, the descent into alcohol and abuse, and her decision to leave with her children. As she spoke, she was surprised to find tears streaming down her face. Olivia listened patiently, her eyes filled with compassion. When Julia finished, the older woman reached across the counter and squeezed her hand. "You're a brave woman, Julia," Olivia said softly. "And a good mother. I'd be honored to have you work here." Julia could hardly believe her ears. "Really? You mean it?" Olivia nodded. "We'll start you part-time, see how it goes. The pay isn't much, I'm afraid, but I can be flexible with your hours. And," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "employees get first pick of the merchandise at a discount." Julia laughed through her tears, feeling for the first time in months that things might actually work out. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I promise you won't regret this." "Call me Olivia, dear," the older woman replied. "I have a feeling we're going to be good friends." As Julia left the shop that day, her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She had a job, a roof over her head, and the beginnings of a support system in this new town. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That night, as she tucked her children into bed in their new home, Julia allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope for the future. The road ahead would be hard, she knew, but she was determined to build a better life for her family. "Mommy," Kevin asked sleepily as she kissed him goodnight, "are we going to be okay?" Julia smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. "We're going to be just fine." The months that followed were some of the most challenging of Julia's life, but also some of the most rewarding. She threw herself into her work at Olivia's shop, quickly learning the ins and outs of the business. Olivia proved to be not just a kind employer, but a mentor and friend. Julia's natural warmth and genuine interest in people made her a hit with the customers. She had a knack for remembering their names and preferences, and soon the shop was busier than ever. Olivia, delighted with Julia's performance, gradually increased her hours and responsibilities. At home, Julia worked tirelessly to create a stable, loving environment for her children. Money was tight, but she made sure they never went hungry. She became an expert at stretching a dollar, cooking nutritious meals from the vegetables in their garden and the discount groceries she could find. Kevin, Luke, and Sally slowly began to thrive in their new surroundings. The fear and uncertainty that had clouded their eyes in the early days of their escape began to fade, replaced by the carefree joy of childhood. Julia's heart swelled with pride as she watched them play and laugh, knowing that her sacrifice had been worth it. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as Julia was restocking shelves in the shop, Olivia approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Julia, dear," she began, "I've been thinking. You've done wonders for this shop, and I'm not getting any younger. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility here? Perhaps, becoming a partner in the business?" Julia nearly dropped the stack of books she was holding. "A partner? Me? But Olivia, I don't have any money to invest." Olivia waved away her concerns. "Money isn't everything, dear. You have something far more valuable, your energy, your ideas, your dedication. We can work out the details, but I want you to have a real stake in this place. You've earned it." Tears welled up in Julia's eyes as she hugged the older woman. "Thank you, Olivia. I don't know what to say." Olivia patted her back gently. "Just say yes, dear. And then we'll celebrate with a cup of tea and those scones you love so much." As Julia settled into her new role as Olivia's business partner, she felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. She threw herself into learning every aspect of running the shop, from bookkeeping to inventory management. Under her influence, the store began to evolve, attracting a younger clientele while still maintaining its charm for long-time customers. But even as Julia's professional life flourished, she couldn't help but feel a lingering sadness. The children still asked about their father sometimes, especially little Sally, who was too young to fully understand what had happened. Julia did her best to answer their questions honestly but gently, never speaking ill of Simon despite the pain he had caused them. One evening, as Julia was closing up the shop, the bell over the door tinkled. She looked up, ready to politely inform the customer that they were closing, only to freeze in shock. Standing in the doorway, looking uncertain and a bit worse for wear, was Simon. "Jules," he said softly, his eyes taking in her surprised face. I've been looking for you." Julia's heart raced, a mix of fear and long-buried longing surging through her. "Simon," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Simon took a tentative step forward, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I needed to see you. To apologize. I've been getting help, Jules. I'm 6 months sober now." Julia's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to run to him, to fall into the arms of the man she had loved for so long. But another part, the part that remembered the fear and pain of those last terrible months, held her back. That's good, Simon, she said carefully. I'm glad you're getting help. Simon nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I know I hurt you, Jules. You and the kids. I can never forgive myself for that. But I'm better now. I want to make things right. Maybe we could try again? Julia felt tears pricking at her eyes. Simon, she began gently, I'm happy that you're doing better. Really, I am. But, we can't go back. Too much has happened. The children and I, we've built a life here. A good life. She saw the hope in Simon's eyes dim, replaced by a deep sadness. But to her relief, she also saw understanding. I understand, he said quietly. I don't deserve a second chance. But Jules, could I see the kids sometimes? I miss them so much. Julia hesitated, weighing the potential impact on her children. But as she looked at Simon, she saw genuine remorse and a desperate longing to reconnect with his family. We'll have to take it slow, she said finally. Maybe you could come for dinner sometime. We could see how it goes. Simon's face lit up with gratitude. Thank you, Jules. That's more than I deserve. As Simon left the shop, promising to be in touch to arrange a visit, Julia leaned against the counter, her emotions in turmoil. She knew the road ahead would be complicated, navigating co-parenting with Simon while maintaining the new life she had built. But as she locked up the shop and headed home to her children, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had faced her greatest fears, rebuilt her life from the ground up, and found strength she never knew she possessed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Julia knew she could face them. She had a home, a career, and most importantly, a future full of hope for herself and her children. As she walked through the door of their small house, greeted by the excited chatter of Kevin, Luke, and Sally, Julia smiled. This was where she belonged. This was home. As the seasons changed and life settled into a new rhythm, Julia found herself busier than ever. The shop continued to thrive under her and Olivia's joint management, and she was constantly amazed by the generosity of their little community. Customers often brought in homemade treats or small gifts for the children, and Julia felt a warmth and belonging she had never experienced before. One crisp autumn morning, as Julia was arranging a new window display, the shop door opened with its familiar jingle. She turned to greet the customer and found herself face to face with a tall, handsome man she had never seen before. Good morning, she said with a smile. Welcome to Olivia's Treasures. Can I help you find anything? The man returned her smile, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. Actually, I'm looking for Olivia Johnson. Is she in today? Julia's smile faltered slightly. It wasn't uncommon for people to ask for Olivia, but something about this man's demeanor made her hesitate. I'm afraid Mrs. Johnson isn't feeling well today. I'm Julia, her business partner. Is there something I can help you with? The man's eyebrows rose in surprise. Business partner? That's new. I'm Michael, by the way. Michael Thompson. I guess you could say I'm an old friend of Olivia's family. Julia relaxed slightly at his friendly tone. It's nice to meet you, Michael. Olivia's never mentioned you, I'm afraid. Michael chuckled softly. That doesn't surprise me. Olivia and I, it's complicated. I've been away for a long time. I just moved back to town and thought I'd stop by to say hello. As they chatted, Julia found herself drawn to Michael's easy manner and kind eyes. He told her about his work as an architect, his recent move back to his hometown after years away, and his fond memories of Olivia from his childhood. Before she knew it, an hour had passed, and Julia realized she had neglected her work entirely. Oh goodness, she exclaimed, glancing at the clock. I'm so sorry, I've kept you talking all this time. Michael grinned, a charming dimple appearing in his cheek. Please, don't apologize. This has been the most pleasant morning I've had in a long time. In fact. He hesitated for a moment, then plunged ahead. I know this might seem forward, but would you like to have coffee with me sometime? When you're not working, of course. Julia felt a flutter in her stomach, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. That would be nice, she found herself saying. But I should warn you, I come with some baggage. 3 small pieces of baggage, to be exact. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. You have children, he said softly. Julia nodded, waiting for the polite excuse she was sure would follow. To her surprise, Michael's smile only grew warmer. Well, then, he said, maybe we could make it ice cream instead of coffee. I know a great place that makes the best sundaes in town. Kids welcome, of course. Julia couldn't help but laugh. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Mr. Thompson. But if you're brave enough, we'd love to join you for ice cream. As Michael left the shop with a promise to call and arrange their ice cream date, Julia felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She hadn't even considered dating since leaving Simon, focusing all her energy on her children and the shop. But there was something about Michael that made her want to take a chance. That evening, as she tucked the children into bed, Julia broached the subject gently. "How would you kids feel about making a new friend?" she asked. "There's a nice man I met today who'd like to take us all out for ice cream." Kevin, always the protective older brother, looked skeptical. "Is he going to be like Dad?" he asked, his young face serious. Julia's heart ached at the question. "No, sweetie," she said softly. "He's just a friend. And we'll all go together, okay? If you don't like him, we don't have to see him again." The ice cream outing turned out to be a roaring success. Michael was a natural with children, regaling them with silly jokes and magic tricks that had even the usually reserved Kevin giggling. By the end of the afternoon, Luke was asking when they could see Mr. Mike again, and Sally had declared him her new best friend. As the weeks passed, Michael became a regular fixture in their lives. He joined them for family movie nights, helped Kevin with his math homework, and even pitched in to help Julia with some much-needed repairs around the house. Julia found herself looking forward to his visits, enjoying the easy companionship and the way he seamlessly fit into their little family. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing after the children had gone to bed, Michael turned to Julia with a serious expression. "Jules," he said softly, using the nickname that had once belonged to Simon but now felt right coming from Michael's lips. "I need to tell you something." Julia felt a flicker of anxiety. "What is it?" Michael took a deep breath. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about my connection to Olivia. The truth is, she's my aunt. My mother's sister." Julia's eyes widened in surprise. "But, why didn't you say anything before?" Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Julia had come to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. "It's complicated. My parents died in a car accident when I was young. Olivia wanted to take me in, but there was some family drama. Long story short, I ended up with other relatives. Olivia and I lost touch over the years." He paused, his eyes meeting Julia's. "When I moved back to town, I wanted to reconnect with her." Michael continued, his voice soft with emotion. "I didn't expect to find her with a business partner, let alone." He trailed off, his eyes meeting Julia's with an intensity that made her breath catch. Julia's mind whirled with this new information. "Does Olivia know you're back in town?" Michael shook his head. "No, I've been working up the courage to face her. When I came to the shop that day, I was planning to talk to her, but then I met you and..." He smiled softly. "Well, things didn't go quite as planned." Julia felt a mix of emotions, surprise at the revelation, a touch of hurt that Michael hadn't been fully honest, but also understanding. Family relationships could be complicated, she knew that all too well. "Michael," she said gently, "you need to talk to Olivia. She talks about her family sometimes. I think she misses them more than she lets on." Michael nodded, looking relieved at Julia's reaction. "You're right. I've been a coward, avoiding it. Will you come with me when I talk to her?" Julia smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Of course. We'll do it together." The next day, Julia and Michael entered Olivia's treasures hand in hand. Olivia looked up from the counter, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of them. "Michael," she gasped, her hand flying to her heart. "Is that really you?" What followed was an emotional reunion filled with tears, laughter, and long overdue explanations. As Julia watched Olivia and Michael embrace, years of misunderstandings melting away, she felt a warm glow of happiness. Her makeshift family was growing in ways she never could have imagined. Over the next few months, life took on a new, joyful rhythm. Michael became a constant presence in their lives, his relationship with Julia deepening even as he reconnected with Olivia. The children adored him, and Julia found herself falling in love with his kind heart and gentle spirit. One crisp autumn evening, almost a year after they first met, Michael took Julia for a walk in the park where they had their first ice cream date with the kids. As the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, he dropped to one knee. "Julia Martinez," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you and your children have brought more joy into my life than I ever thought possible. I love you, and I love Kevin, Luke, and Sally as if they were my own. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy streamed down Julia's face as she nodded, too overcome to speak. As Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple, elegant band that was perfect for her, Julia marveled at how far she had come. From the depths of despair, she had built a new life filled with love, purpose, and hope. The wedding was a small, joyful affair held in Olivia's backyard. Kevin proudly walked his mother down the aisle, while Luke and Sally scattered flower petals with enthusiasm. Olivia, beaming with happiness, stood as Julia's matron of honor. As Julia and Michael exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other and the children, Julia caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the gathering. Simon stood there, a bittersweet smile on his face. He had kept his promise to stay sober and had been slowly rebuilding his relationship with the children. Seeing him there, supportive despite the pain it must have caused him, Julia felt a surge of gratitude for how far they had all come. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated, Olivia pulled Julia aside. Her eyes were misty as she hugged her tightly. "My dear girl," Olivia said, her voice wavering slightly, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. When you first walked into my shop, I saw a woman who was battered but not broken. You flourished beyond my wildest dreams." Julia felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Olivia. You gave me a chance when I needed it most." Olivia smiled, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Well, I have one more surprise for you, my dear. Consider it a wedding gift." She led Julia to the old shed in the corner of the yard, Michael following curiously behind them. With a flourish, Olivia opened the door, revealing stacks of old furniture and boxes. "I've been meaning to clean this out for years," Olivia explained. "I want you and Michael to go through it. Anything you want for your new home together is yours." As they began to explore the shed's contents, Michael let out a surprised exclamation. He had opened an old trunk, revealing a collection of antique jewelry and coins. "Aunt Olivia," he gasped, "do you know what these are worth?" Olivia's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "I had no idea that was in there. It must have belonged to your grandfather. He always was a bit of a collector." As they examined the unexpected treasure, Julia's mind raced with possibilities. This could secure their financial future, provide for the children's education, maybe even allow them to expand the business. But more than the monetary value, Julia felt overwhelmed by the symbolism of the moment. This hidden treasure, revealed on her wedding day, felt like a sign. A sign that sometimes, life's greatest riches come disguised as challenges, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that with courage and perseverance, it's possible to build a beautiful life from the ashes of heartbreak. As she stood there, surrounded by her new husband, her dear friend and mentor, and the tangible promise of a bright future, Julia felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She thought of the scared, broken woman she had been when she first arrived in this town, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. "Well," she said, smiling through happy tears at Michael and Olivia, "I guess this means our adventure is just beginning." Michael wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I can't wait to see where it takes us," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the sounds of laughter and celebration drifted in from the garden, where their friends and family, both old and new, awaited them, Julia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. With love, resilience, and the support of their makeshift family, anything was possible. And so, as the sun set on their wedding day, it also rose on a new chapter in Julia's life, one filled with hope, joy, and the promise of happily ever after. 5 years later, Julia stood in front of Olivia's treasures, now expanded and renamed Olivia and Julia's Treasures, and smiled at the bustling street around her. The once quiet neighborhood had transformed into a vibrant community, with new shops and cafes lining the streets. At the center of it all was their store, a beacon of warmth and welcome for newcomers and longtime residents alike. Inside, Michael was helping a customer choose the perfect vintage lamp, while Kevin, now a lanky teenager, restocked shelves with an efficiency that made Julia proud. Luke and Sally were at school, but their artwork adorned the walls, adding splashes of color and joy to the space. Olivia, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, sat in her favorite armchair by the window, regaling a group of regular customers with tales from her youth. Her eyes met Julia's, and they shared a warm smile, years of friendship and mutual respect passing between them in that glance. As Julia turned to head back inside, she noticed a woman standing across the street, looking lost and a little frightened. Something about her demeanor struck a chord in Julia's memory. With a gentle word to Michael, she crossed the street. "Excuse me," Julia said softly, approaching the woman. "Are you all right? Can I help you with anything?" The woman started, fear flashing in her eyes before she registered Julia's kind expression. I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm new in town. I don't know where to go." Julia's heart went out to the woman, recognizing the look of someone who had left everything behind to start anew. "Well, you've come to the right place," she said warmly. "Why don't you come inside? We've got great coffee, and I'd love to hear your story, if you'd like to share it." The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded, relief washing over her face. As Julia led her across the street towards the shop, she felt a profound sense of déjà vu. She remembered standing in this woman's shoes, lost and afraid, and how one act of kindness from Olivia had changed the course of her life. Now, it was her turn to offer that same kindness to someone else. As they entered the shop, the warm atmosphere enveloping them, Julia knew that this was more than just a business. It was a haven, a place of new beginnings and second chances. As she poured a cup of coffee for her new acquaintance, Julia silently renewed her vow to keep paying forward the love and support she had received. At that moment, Julia realized that her journey had come full circle. From a woman needing help to one able to offer it, from a lost soul to the heart of a thriving community. Julia felt a deep sense of contentment as she settled in to listen to the newcomer's story. This was her legacy, not just the successful business or the loving family, but the spirit of resilience, kindness, and hope that she now passed on to others. And in this simple act of reaching out to another soul in need, Julia knew that her own story of redemption and renewal would ripple outward, touching lives in ways she might never know. As the evening sun cast a golden glow through the shop windows, Julia looked around at the life she had built, her family, her friends, her community, and knew that this, right here, was her happily ever after. Not perfect, not without challenges, but rich with love, purpose, and the joy of helping others find their way home. And in the end, isn't that what truly matters?